I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. At the time, I was a raging alcoholic and drug addict, so my memory is kind of hazy, so I do apologize if details aren't there, and major events are left out. Now, I've been sober for almost a year. Anyways, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service tech. One of these jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment on a string of gas stations starting from St. George to Salt Lake, slowly working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, hitting every store that was needing devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me, somewhere between Richfield and another town, one of those small towns in between. I had finished a store late, about 10 to 11 p.m. or so, and wanted to get to the next town over so I could continue my work in the morning rather than drive 2 hours in the morning. As I was driving down the highway, Google Maps had told me to take this dirt road to get to the town I was working in next. Hesitant on why this was a route, I turned left into it. A long dirt road with nothing around me. Pitch black darkness other than my high beams. About 5 to 7 minutes into my drive, my truck makes a sputter. It was an old 2008 work truck. Piece of crap. I cursed under my breath and put it in park. I lifted the hood and nothing seemed to be wrong. I have mild mechanic knowledge. Of course, I look down on my phone and see I have no cell service at all. I checked my work phone and the same thing. My only option here was to pretty much either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I could get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but this trip, I had forgotten to bring them with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a walkie flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss. I'd like to add that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this unless you had to do it or it led to a specific point. I wouldn't even call it a road, more of a trail. Brush and trees lined up the trail like a natural wall. I'm not anxious or easily scared. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark, quiet desert. Every step further from the truck made me feel worse. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing. Kind of muffled laughing. Something you'd hear out of a kid show right behind me. I swung around quickly. Nothing. My boots are sinking into the mounds of sand as I quickly just keep pushing forward. My heart is beating out of my chest like a ticking time bomb. I hear it again, but closer, louder, like if it was 4 to 5 feet from me. I'm fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now. High starting like lasers around for somewhere to hide. I do not believe in paranormal or aliens or anything like that. I just figured it was some deranged desert hobo or something or some sort of drug addict. The adrenaline coursing through me. I hid behind a rock that was nearby, crouched down. My right knee hurt from all the rocks on the ground, but I didn't care. I needed to hide. The rocks were on one of those 3-footish mound rocks. The moon was shining bright, so I could see some things. As I am scanning the desert, I see silhouettes of 2 people running. I can barely make them out, but my eyes have adjusted to the dark abyss. I forgot to mention after a while of this running, I turned my flashlight off not to give away my location. I hear them talking, but I'm far enough away to not be able to understand what they were saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends saying that I love them and that I'm sorry for anything I had done wrong in my life. They didn't send because I didn't have any service, just coping in a traumatic event. I'm not a small guy. I'm 5 feet 10 inches and 230 pounds, but I was unarmed and outnumbered. God knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning on doing when I was found and helpless. I waited, but they did not leave the general location of where they were at, scrambling around like mosquitoes. I had thought of the only thing I could do. I grabbed 2 small rocks. I'm not religious, but I prayed to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck in the road. I heard them scurry away towards the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I slowly walked through the brush back to the truck. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run. Never confirmed 3 people in the desert with me. As I got closer, I could see the truck. I felt like I was in heaven. Every step was closer to salvation. My boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand. Branches and brushes stabbed me in my cargo work pants. I hear them tailing me, but I could not turn around. I didn't even care to see who or what it was chasing me. I see the truck driver's side doors completely open. I had left it closed. I checked the back seat and flung the door open more. I flew into the driver's seat in the truck and did the most stupid thing ever, but it was the only thing I could think of. Started it. Took a couple of tries to start it, but it cranked and let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter into drive and drove. As I was driving, hauling ass down this dirt road, I saw hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by, scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could, right at one of them, and sped off. I watched it do flips right into where they were. I yelled as I sped off in the pitch-dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as it drove. Silence. Nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of the whole situation. I drove until I had seen town lights. I was sweating, white knuckles on the steering wheel, gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around 12 a.m. I threw myself into a local 7-Eleven. Looking terrified, the cashier asked me what's wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some old burly-looking man. I'm covered in tattoos from head to toe, so he treated me almost as a criminal. Turns out a hose had blown. I don't remember exactly what it was. I got in town and called my boss, who was upset at the late-night call he was receiving. He was shocked at what I said and said to call the sheriff's office and mechanic. The mechanic guy was super nice and didn't charge me for the repair. The cops weren't much help. They basically looked at me like I had been up too long and I was hallucinating. But I wasn't, and asked me if I had taken drugs or had been drunk, and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me that he had never heard of something like that in the area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was a Motel 6, but I can't remember. I swear I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off me. I ended up returning home early and quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo I had taken on the service call had come and reminded me of this story. I had to write about it. I had to tell someone. Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me? Did they see the work truck and say, "Ooh, expensive tools and copper"? I have no idea. I'm just curious who you think these people were and why they were hunting me like an animal. Has anyone had a similar experience? How close do you think I was to being murdered in the desert? If you're enjoying the video, please subscribe the channel for future videos, and like and share with your friends. It was the summer of '98, and the California desert was scorching hot. I was just 5 years old, riding shotgun in my mom's old, beat-up convertible. The car barely ran, but the seats were red velvet, and the radio worked. Being able to take the top down almost made up for the lack of air conditioning. My days were usually spent at daycare or with babysitters while my single, student mom worked long hours to make ends meet. But today was different. Today was special. My mom was driving me across the county to my cousin's house for a birthday party. There would be dress-up games and an ice cream cake. To make the day even better, we had stopped at McDonald's before hitting the road, and I got a Happy Meal with a stuffed Simba from The Lion King. That toy would play a bigger role than I could have imagined. We eased onto the freeway, and for the most part, it was a pleasant, uneventful ride. I remember the loud noise of the cars and the hot wind in my face. Then, I first became aware of the truck as it laid on its horn behind us. I turned in my seat to see a huge, gray monster of a truck tailgating us ridiculously close. As soon as it was safe, my mom changed to the slow lane on the right of the freeway, thinking he would pass us. Instead, he pulled level to our car, rolled down his window, and began screaming at us to pull over in the middle of the desert on the freeway. My mom ignored him and told me to do the same. I remember feeling uneasy, but more annoyed than scared. Kind of like, "Dude, come on. This is my day to have fun. Leave us alone." Besides, I wasn't really a stranger to angry, shouting men, even at that age. Unfortunate, but true. I think the lack of reaction irritated the man. Or maybe this was his plan all along. He swiftly pulled into our lane and essentially forced us off the road onto the shoulder. My mom did her best to maintain control of the car and avoid contact with his vehicle, but it was pretty much impossible. The unmistakable crunch of metal rang out, and both vehicles came to a stop on the side of the desert freeway. There was no one around to help or places to go. Mom checked me to see if I was okay and stayed in her seat. Now, if I were her, I don't know if I would have waited to confront this man with a child in my car after that stunt. But my mom has always been the tough-as-nails type, not afraid of anything, especially when she feels wronged. And of course, she had no idea what was about to happen next. In a flash of anger and cursing, the man was at the driver's side door, screaming about the damage to his car. He claimed it was caused by food trash flying out of the convertible and landing on his front window, blocking his view. He started demanding compensation and told my mom to get out of the car and look at his car. At this point, my mom refused to get out. She pointed at a call box a fair distance away, remember those? And said it was best to call the cops and let them handle it. Definitely not the answer the man wanted. In one fluid movement, the man grabbed the back of my mother's head and smashed it into the steering wheel. Once, twice, 3 times, leaving her unconscious. Lifting her like a sack of potatoes, he dropped her on the side of the road and jumped into the driver's seat. The keys were still in the ignition, and he started the car up. I hadn't even reacted yet. I think I was in absolute shock. It wasn't until I felt the car moving and getting back on the road that I registered what had happened. And when it hit me hard. I went ballistic. I was no longer just annoyed with this man. I was furious for what he had done. I remember holding my stuffed Simba by the tail as I climbed out of my seat and began screaming while whipping the man in the face, trying to blind him. My battle cry, which I'll always remember, was, "You're the meanest man in the whole world." I clawed and kicked, giving no care to what was going to happen to me. This man was going to pay. This led to a couple of things happening. First, I made it impossible to drive that car safely, and he ended up crashing into the shoulder again. Second, by this time, people had started to see the combination of a woman lying on the shoulder and a convertible with a Tasmanian devil of a 5-year-old beating up on some creeper, and they began to alert authorities. I don't remember too much after that. I remember the cops coming and sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They gave me a teddy bear and asked me a lot of questions. My grandma picked me up. My mom went to the hospital, where she thankfully didn't have any major damage, just a busted nose and some whiplash. I never made it to my cousin's party, and I never saw that white convertible again. I'll always be thankful for my main man, Simba, having my back through all of that. I don't know what that man's intentions were. Looking back and knowing the area we lived in, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if drugs played a major part in all of this. It was 2010, and I was driving from New Orleans, Louisiana to Eugene, Oregon. I was 24 years old, and I had my 2-year-old pit bull and a 14-foot U-Haul truck packed with everything I owned. I had a fancy flip phone and printed MapQuest directions. Smartphones were just coming out, but I didn't have one. Cell service was spotty, especially in the desert, where I could go hundreds of miles without any signal. I was driving through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or exit for a very long time. My U-Haul was running low on gas. Just when I started to panic, I saw a small town up ahead. I pulled in, and it was tiny, only about 6 streets. I was so focused on finding gas that I didn't even notice the name of the town. I filled up and was ready to get back on the road. But I couldn't find my way back to the highway. I circled the town 4 times, getting more frustrated each time. How could I get lost in such a small town? I could see the highway, but I couldn't get to it. Finally, I went back to the gas station to ask for directions. When I got gas, I paid at the pump and never went inside. This time, I went in. There was a skinny guy with black hair hanging in front of his eyes. He looked like he needed a good wash. He wasn't creepy, but he was rude. He never looked up from his magazine. He gave me directions that didn't make sense. He told me to take a road that would get me to the highway in about 17 miles. I was confused. I hadn't driven that far to get into town. Why would it take so long to get back to the highway? I could see it from the town. He gave me some explanation about the road curving around, but it didn't make sense. He still didn't look at me. He He just waved his hand toward the door. When I got back to my truck, my whole body started trembling and my heart raced. I got in and burst into tears. I had this terrible feeling that the guy had bad intentions. I didn't know what, but I knew I wasn't going to follow his directions. This was the only store in town, and there was no one else to ask. I decided I would drive around until I found my way out, even if it took all night. Then, a big red pickup truck pulled up. Out stepped the quintessential Texan, huge, husky, in flannel and work boots. Without thinking, I jumped out of my truck and approached him. I asked him for directions to the highway. He looked concerned and gave me directions to a hairpin turnoff at the end of a small tunnel I had passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it was hard to see. He laughed and said it was only a quarter mile to the highway. I asked him about the directions the gas station attendant had given me. He looked at me intently and asked how I knew about that route. I told him. He went to his truck, grabbed a local map, and traced the route. The road led away from town and ended in the desert. He told me it was nothing but junk cars and trailers, all owned by a family known for troublemaking and drug use. He told me the gas station attendant was part of that family. He said I was smart to listen to my instincts and to be careful traveling out here. I don't know if the attendant wanted what was in the back of my U-Haul or what was in the driver's seat, but I was grateful I didn't find out. I learned that sometimes angels look like red-haired Texans with scruffy faces and rusty pickups. So, thank you, random Texan stranger. You really saved my ass, and I will always remember you with tons of love. Let me preface this by saying I'm not claiming this was any particular phenomenon. I'm telling you exactly what happened. No exaggeration or lying of any kind. So, on to what happened. 20 years ago, my brother and I, 19 and 15 at the time, were working a landscaping job in northern Arizona. We got off work around 7 p.m., hopped into his truck, and started the 45-minute commute home. On the way back, there was a dirt road that led about 20 meters into the middle of the desert. It was mainly for dirt bikes or four-wheeling, but we used it to stop and smoke weed without being seen. We had done this about 30 times up to that point, though never again after this night. We drove a few miles in and parked between two hills that hid the truck pretty well. I started rolling a joint while my brother talked, but I wasn't really listening until I heard his voice change. "Did you hear that?" he asked. We both listened, and I heard a strange, high-pitched sound for a split second, then sudden silence. The desert is actually a pretty loud place at night. I remember realizing that when the sound was gone. As we sat there for maybe 5 more seconds, my brother gasped, started the truck, and floored it. We were flying out of the desert, and I was bouncing around from his reckless driving. I asked him, "What the heck, man?" But he didn't say anything. We hit the street, and the lights of a passing car showed his face. He was pale and wide-eyed, with his mouth open. I got scared seeing so much fear from him and just sat there waiting for him to stop. He finally stopped at a McDonald's parking lot in town. He started crying. I just patted him on the shoulder and waited. After a few minutes, he asked if I remembered anything. I had no idea what he was talking about. We were in the desert for only 5 minutes before he started driving like a madman. He looked at me and started sobbing. He said something had grabbed me through my closed passenger window. He had gone for his pistol when he suddenly froze and couldn't move because the thing told him that if he didn't stay right where he was and wait, I would die and he would be next. He said he felt it in his heart to be true. The thing that had me was very tall and thin with huge black eyes. He doesn't remember anything else about it. He sat frozen in absolute terror for hours while the thing disappeared with me into the desert. And suddenly, I appeared in the truck, and he gunned it out of there. Over the years, I've talked to him about it twice. He's ashamed and still very afraid. He changed after this, always seeming less energetic and a little withdrawn. I wish I could help. I told him he was blameless and thanked him for getting us out of there. I've considered getting hypnotized to see if I could recover any memories, but whenever I think about it, I remember the light flashing over his face and the sheer terror I saw there. Better not to know, I think. A Allow me to set the stage for this. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base, about 3 to 6 kilometers or so, was this structure that looked like a castle. Through interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that they believed it was built by Alexander the Great. Whether that was true or not, I will never know. But let me tell you, this place looked ancient. So, being Marines, we did the only thing we thought was prudent at the time. We went out on a patrol with the intent of setting up an OP inside the structure. We took our Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept repeating the same word over and over. Don't ask me to remember what it is because this was a decade ago and there is no way I can remember that. But what I do know now is they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyway without our Afghans with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an accident waiting to happen. It had mud clay brick walls on 4 sides with a building in the middle. So we set security, made sure we had comm checks with our patrol base, and they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were in case we got into trouble. Darkness fell. Not too long after, I went up to take my turn on the wall with my friend to watch for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us and any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not 20 minutes into our shift was when weird stuff started going down. The entire time I was on the wall, I felt washed from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall, not far from where we were sitting. I saw it walking, but it was a robed figure that looked to be almost floating. I turned to my friend to see if he saw it too, and he said he did, but when he got his night vision back on, it was his turn to rest. The figure was gone. We didn't see anything else after that for the rest of our shift. We uneasily finished and went to rest where I ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it felt like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife. I was a machine gunner and couldn't just grab my machine gun, and I felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground, tried to squirm free, and I couldn't move. So, I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand over my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared, and I could move and talk again. I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around me saw me. My training had kicked in, and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates called me down, and after telling them what happened, they all admitted to having the creeps and the feeling of being watched the whole time we were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, and so every noise and rustle of the wind made it even worse than the total silence of that ancient fort in that ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert and a part of the world where there is absolutely zero light and noise pollution, then I suppose it can be hard to appreciate how any noise in a place like that in the middle of the night in total darkness when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy and now you're on even higher alert from something you can't understand. It's just about the scariest thing anyone can ever experience. I'll never experience that kind of fear again in my life, ever. To finish quickly, as soon as the sun came up, we left. Everybody was scared shitless, and none of us spoke about it again to each other. We never went back to that area again, and I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experience that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is that I wonder if it was just in my head.